All right, guys. So when we think about the loops, we're going to think about them like this. They're going to have a couple pieces to them, right? So they are going to have a like a statement, a loop statement, right? Which basically is going to tell you what kind of loop it's going to be. And the only two that you need to worry about are right now is a while loop, and a for loop. Okay. Now they'll look a little bit different from one another, but they basically have they have some same components. Remember that the code that is going to execute is always going to be set apart by the curly braces, right? So anything within the curly braces is going to be what executes when you run this block of code. All right? Now, let's look at what these are going to have, right? So you're going to have the loop statement first, right? Then you're going to have a condition check, right? And these are the two commonalities. Now, for loops get a little bit more confusing, but they're pretty straightforward still. Okay, so the syntax is weird, but you'll kind of adjust to that. So for a while loop, I'm writing a while loop. Okay, so I am basically just going to say while. This tells Java. The block that comes up next is a while loop, right? You're going to treat it the same way. So we're going to have while, and then we're going to have a parenthesis, and then a close parenthesis. In here is where you're going to have the condition that it's going to check, right? So this will run as long, the block will run as long as this condition is true. Okay? So what I mean by that is if I come in here and I say while true, right? And remember that this is a Boolean value, right? So that's not a variable or anything. It is a while, or it is a Boolean value of true, right? So if I write this is going to run forever, right? Whatever happens on the inside of this, it's going to be a continuous loop, right? Infinite loop. Because true can never be false. Correct? Okay. So if instead of true, I put, I do something else, or I write, instead of that, I put x equals 1, right? Now the value of x could change, right, at some point in the code, so then it could exit the loop, right? And the way that the code runs is, it reads this, it checks the condition before the code runs. So if this condition is not true, nothing happens in this code, right? It would just skip it, right? If it's not true, then it would skip it and it would run the next line of code after that. Does that make sense? Okay? But if it is true, right? So if it checks it and it is true, there is, that x does equal 1. So if we actually came back up here and we said, int x equals 1, right? Now that code's going to run. Okay? And what happens is it reads this, it checks this to see if it's true. If this is true, then it runs the code. It gets to the bottom of the code, to this curly brace, and then it comes back up and it checks the condition again. If the condition is still true, it will continue to run, right? Over and over and over again until that condition is false. Does that make sense? Okay. That is a while loop. This is just a while loop, right? That's all it takes. So it's fairly simple on the surface to understand. What's interesting is trying to change this value, like how we go about changing that value. And I'll show you some examples of that later. Okay? Does this make sense? Yes. Anybody have questions? Is everyone focusing? Good. All right. So that is the while loop, right? Now we also have the for loop, and I'm going to show you that. I sort of already wrote this one up for you so you can see it a little easier. Here's the while loop, right? So this is an example of the while loop. So while this condition, right? So let's say that I continue is a reserved word, so you can't use it as a variable name, but cont, right? So continue while continue equals true, keep printing out hello, right? Okay. This loop would run infinitely. Does anybody know why? Do what?
Always true.
It's always true, right? There's no place in here for this to change, right? Okay. So, let's look at another example real quickly. Here's the for loop. Now, the for loop is a little bit more confusing. Okay, there are separate pieces to it, and this gets a little bit more difficult to follow. But it's still I think if you're patient with it and you just learn this format, you memorize the format, right? You'll be able to use it fairly effectively. Okay, so notice that we have the same thing, right? We have hang on one second. If we go back, right, we have the same thing. We have the loop declaration, so this is going to be a for loop, right? Then we have this in here, which is, the conditional will be in here. And then we have the block of code itself, right? So if we've got all those details, then we just have to deal with what's inside that parenthesis, which is a little bit more confusing, but it's still manageable. So if we look at this now and we think through what this is going to be, we have three pieces, right? We have 1, we have 2, and we have 3. You notice they're all set apart by these semicolons, right? Not commas. I guarantee you every one of y'all is going to write a for loop, and you're going to look at it for hours. You should be just ready to cry if you haven't already. And you're going to look at it, and you bring it in the next day, this code won't run, and you'll have used commas here instead of semicolons. It'll all be right.
It wasn't a pleasant experience.
There's a wonderful law in programming that says typically there is an inverse proportion between the longer it takes you to solve a problem in your code, a bug, and with how simple it is. So the harder it is to solve the problem, the more simple of the problem typically is, right? Like I used a semicolon, and so it's not my algorithm was wrong, but I had a semicolon in the wrong place.
Physics.
Yep, I think that's true a lot of places. All right, so let's talk about what these things are, right? We have 1, 2, and 3. So number 1, right? We are declaring a local variable. Do y'all remember what a local variable is? Okay, so that's an instance variable. Local is even more specific. It is only visible inside the curly braces that it is declared for. Right? So this int I, right, I'm declaring it here. This variable can't be seen outside of this for loop. If down here I said print I, it would throw an error because you couldn't see it. Yeah. This is not public, or the method is public, but the variable is declared inside this block of code. And so you just have to trust me that if it's a local variable declared inside these curly braces, right, that you can't see it externally. Okay? All right. So let's look at what those are, like what those work for, okay? So we're going to declare a local variable, right? And this is used as typically this should be used as an incrementer. It's going to go up or down, right? Okay, so one or the other. Now, 2, right? So that's the first one, and I'm setting the initial value of it to 0, right? So declaring a variable and setting it to 0. A lot of times you're going to see I. It doesn't really have to be that. It could be anything. It's just kind of form. You typically use I inside these. Okay? Now the second one, number 2, right? This is the conditional check, right? So the loop will continue just like in the other one, in the while loop, as long as this condition is true. Okay? So, in this situation, right, I is 0 to begin with. Is this condition true? Is I less than 10?
Yes.
Okay, so this would be true, and so the loop would continue. It would execute the code inside the curly braces. Yeah. Yeah. Hobble on out of here. Let's go hop along. All right. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
So number 1, you're declaring the variable you're going to use to increment through the code. Number 2 is the evaluation, right? It's to check to see if that condition is true. And then number 3 changes the value of the variable. Okay? Now, this is an important piece to this one. This happens at the end of the code block. Okay? Now, so here's what we have. We have these 3 pieces. Okay? We have the integer is set to an initial value. Then I is less than 10. So that's the evaluation as long as that condition is true. And then the third one is going to increment I. It's going to move I. In this case, it moves it up by 1 each time, right? Okay? And then inside this block of code, it's going to print out the variable I, right? Whatever number is in that variable. Okay? So can anybody tell me what the output of this code would be?
Oh, basically, it's how they count like the numbers of like the end result of the button.
Yeah, so let's actually look at it to see, okay? Now, it wouldn't be 1 through 9. 0 through 9, right? Because it's initially 0. So let's walk through the code. Because I think a lot of times it's important for y'all to actually see this, to see some of the details with this. Okay, so the first time this code runs, so the code is running down, it hits this for loop, and it says, okay, I'm going to loop through this code, the next block, the next set of curly braces, until I'm done, right? So int I, so I'm declaring the variable I equals 0, right? So I equals 0. It checks to see if this condition is true. Is it true? Okay, so the code block is going to execute. So it runs through this, and it gets to this, and it says, print out I. What is the current value of I? 0, right? So it would print out 0. It gets to the bottom of the code, and when it gets here, at the bottom of the code is when it runs number 3, right? So down here is where it runs 3 to make sure. So now what is the value of I? Right? Because I equals I plus 1. So now I is going to be equal to 1, right? Okay, and then it runs up and it looks again. Now, it does not declare the variable again. That's done. So I is not, it doesn't reset the value of I. So it immediately checks the condition. Is this condition true? Is 1 less than 10? That one should not be difficult. Yeah, they're going to be difficult questions. That one shouldn't be it. So it is. So then what's it going to print out? 1, right? And then this changes to 2, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 9. Okay? Now when it gets to 9, at the end of this run, it runs this, and and so now I equals 10, right? It checks this. Is 10 less than 10? False. So then it moves down, it skips over the loop, and then runs the next line of code after that. Does that make sense? Yes, no? Maybe so?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. Here's what I would like for y'all to do. I would like for y'all to take the program that the project that you built, and you should have a controller class, you should have a for class, and you should have a while class. I would like for y'all to write code. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. I would like for y'all to, if not individually, in partners, write code for each of those. Now, the other piece of this, though, is I want you to run it from the main method in here, right? So in other words, I want you to instantiate those classes, and I want you to call them from the controller class. Right? Y'all remember how we do that? Nope? All right, let's do it real quick so we can see it. So I'm going to come up into the main method in the controller class, remember, because that's where the program's going to start. And we're going to declare, we're going to build out a for variable and a while variable, okay? So I want a bucket, and we're going to call it my for loop, right? Now, this is my bucket, right? That's going to be that's a local, or that's a variable in this method that I'm going to carry around information. What am I going to carry around in that? A for loop. So I'm going to use, it is going to be an object of the for classification, right? Of the for loop. Okay? Does that make sense? And then I'm going to say equals. And now I want a new one, right? I'm going to make a new instance of this. So how do I do that? New. And I named it for. All right? Now it's got my for loop. And then now I'm going to say while. My while loop equals new while. All right?
Wait, why do you put the loop after the while?
I don't have to. Remember, these can, whenever y'all ask that, I know that what's really going on is that y'all are forgetting that you can make up those names, right? You just want it to be something that you understand. So there's no I could name this if I wanted to, right? I could name this Bob, right? And this one Frank. Okay? But I don't have to. And the reason, so I don't want to, because that would get confusing later on, right? So instead, I'm just going to have my while and my for. Okay? Now from there, I want y'all to try to figure out, I want you to remember, how do I call a method from one of those classes? So if I go my for dot, it's going to give me all of the methods that are available to it. Some of it has because it's an object, and all objects have built-in methods. But if you look, right, one of them is one that I made, run for. Okay? And I can do that, and then run it. And it printed out my numbers for me. Okay? All right, so I want y'all to struggle through that. I don't want you to just copy it. I want you to struggle through it.